So I try to watch live on Yom Kippur. That's all I can say, Schulman's, and everyone else who's there, Kales. You'll probably be at a shul, but if you're not at a place where you're at a shul, stop at that time and jump on in to our service wherever you are. It is going to be hard to do, by the way, over the phone. There was a computer glitch in the last. I didn't even tell people about it, but I had to do some coding. I did some computer coding late Friday afternoon before I sent out the email with telling people that the service was live. I had to test it, and sure enough, it wasn't working. So I got on the phone. I had to call Vimeo. They couldn't fix it. I called our people at GiveSmart. They couldn't fix it. And literally, I was pasting code out of from one place to the other. Yeah, you'd be proud of me. You'd be proud of me, John. I was doing coding, but they said that the workaround we came up with, it would not play on someone's phone. So I said, look, I don't think a lot of people are going to watch the service by phone, and there wasn't. But one person came up to me at Toshnik and said, it didn't work on my phone. And I said, yeah, well, the workaround we came up with, I had to actually put it in, like I never would have known how to do this. I mean, no one, I literally got to talk to a tech person who, literally took me through how to do this workaround. But in order to do it, you actually had to set dimensions of an image. And it was like 1280 by 720, and it just wouldn't play on a phone. So anyways, let's just put it this way. It was a little nerve-wracking. And I tried to fix it myself for like 3 or 4 hours on Friday, and I couldn't fix it. And then I finally said, look, I give up. And I called the tech people, and it was already about 5 or 6 o'clock. I was like, please help me, because I don't have a lot of time. And they said, I said it is for Sunday, but if we don't figure it out today, I can't send out an email for people with giving them warning and stuff. So anyways, we did fix it. But for people who had it on the phone, it was not good. The sound was perfect. Yeah. All of it looked fine. The only thing it didn't work is on the phone. But I thought to myself, if you're going to watch the service for 2 hours on a phone, God help you anyways, because it's not, no one's going to want to see that. So we came up with a solution. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was all Michael. I mean, that's all thanks to Mike Carland and Pastor. Yeah, Andy. Pastor Andy is a very nice guy. He was there. He was very helpful. He was very, he said to me after, I want to tell you something, because a sermon of the depiction of Jews in Hollywood and this kind of thing. He actually came up to me afterwards. No, I didn't say that. I shouldn't say that, Joanne. He said, look, how can I be a better, how can I be as a Gentile? How can I be a better participant in this? What can I do? And I said, look, this is really, I have to say, this is our issue. This is this is an issue for people in Hollywood to deal with. But somebody came up to me afterwards and said, you never talked about, it was a really good point. It was something else. Oh, it's something that's on literally right now, and I haven't seen it, and that's why I didn't talk about it. It's got a pretty Jewish content, but Steve Carell is in a new thing called The Patient. It's a thing on, I think it's on Hulu. I think it's on Hulu. It's a drama about a serial killer who kidnaps a psychiatrist. I'm looking at you, Joyce. That's pretty scoot. Yeah, and he kidnaps her. He kidnaps him. He kidnaps so the patient kidnaps the doctor to help him to be less homicidal. So he literally keeps him hostage. So it sounds really creepy. And Carell plays a Jewish psychiatrist, the one who gets kidnapped. But there's a lot of Jewish content. No, he's Italian, which I almost give him a pass. If you're Italian, you can play. So if you're Italian, you can play a Jew. That's what I'm saying. You're close enough if you're Italian. No, it's almost right. It's almost like you could say. I always thought that Valerie Harper was Italian because I knew she wasn't Jewish. Turns out she's not Italian either. She actually is not. She doesn't have either Jewish or Italian. Well, he's Arab. He's Arab. Yeah, I know. Well, that's a whole nother issue, which is and also her agent, her manager. What's her name? Alex Bornstein, who, by the way, was in my carpool when I went to Heschel as a kid. And she was nuts then. I mean, she would do talking voices. She'd be sitting in the back seat. I'd be in the front with I didn't get to, I was a kid. I didn't drive, but I was the oldest kid. So I used to get to sit shotgun, and she would be doing these voices in the back seat. I turn around and be like, she's crazy. Like you say, she was just like, it was like weird, and it was really weird, and she was weird. And sure turned out she turned that into a great career, because she's on Family Guy. She does all the stuff with McFarlane, and she's on Miss Maisel. She's been on a lot of stuff. She's on Mad TV. But I'm telling you, as a kid, even as like a 9 or 10-year-old, I was like, oh my goodness, that is a creative kid. But dang, if she can go to Hollywood, I don't know what would have happened. Anyways, but it was an interesting issue about entertainment, and it happens so frequently that, like, until you think about it, you don't really realize this issue. And I've talked about it with other people over the years, and like, what other group would that be okay doing?
Far back as Barbara Streisand, who would be Funny Girl. He played it. He wasn't playing a Jewish man, was he? Though?
No, but that's not what that's not that. The point is also, how do you put a prosthetic nose on somebody? How do you put a big nose on somebody in 2022? Like, if you're going to play him, fine, but don't put a giant nose on the guy.
Yeah, who are you talking about?
Bradley Cooper playing Leonard Bernstein. How do you do that? I mean, look, if you're going to say, oh, anybody can play any role, fine, but don't put a giant nose on the guy.
Especially when he had work done on his face already.
Whatever. You can say what you want. He's a good looking. Look, I know Bradley Cooper's a good looking guy, but I'm just saying that don't make any sense.
Play American, but no American actors
Play British. It's true. It's true. It's true. I know. Play Americans. I know.
And it was some movie, and part of it.
That's true. Dinklage puts on. I would say he's English, but he does Game of Thrones. Yeah, Dinklage. Yeah, Tyrion Lannister. I wouldn't say he's English. He's well, no, but he speaks in a somewhat English accent. I mean, he's a Lannister. He's in a fantasy world, but I know, but he is true. He is true. I know, you're right. There's so many you don't even recognize, but it's usually not you're right. It's usually not the other way around. I don't. What's his name? The guy who played House for years. That guy did a character like they always. But there's so many. There's so many.
One of the doctors, the one from Australia. He's from Australia.
Yeah. Anyways, so it is definitely something to think about, because again, it happens all the time to us, and if it happened in any other group, people would say that's offensive. So, all right. So where we left off last week was this interesting issue of miscarriage leading to a fetus not being born, which I mentioned is the basis for basically it's the basis. It's not the end of the story, but it's where all discussion about abortion in Judaism starts, which is that the fetus is not treated exactly like an existing life, because there are damages, as opposed to the normal thing, which is an eye for an eye, a life for a life, is the famous phrase, nefesh tachat nefesh, a life for a life, which it doesn't say here. And so this is where it comes from. But it was really interesting, because the words in Hebrew are that the woman, the translation is a miscarriage results. What does the King James say? Verse 22, 21, 22. What does the King James say instead of a miscarriage? When two or more parties fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman.
I'm the one that he continued there too. He shall not be punished for
No. Your might be off. I mean, not yours isn't off. It's the King James. The King James.
So that the fruit depart from him, yet no mischief follows. He shall surely be punished according and the woman's husband will lay upon him. He shall pay as the judges determine.
So that's the King James. And so the word for miscarriage there was the fruit. Well, wait, it gets better because glory has a translation from the New International Version, the NIV, which I want you to hear because this translation conveys a whole different meaning. Listen to this one.
If men who are fighting hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you have to take life for life, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so what's interesting here is nowhere does it actually say a court. Though you could say the translation leads to as judges determine, but which is essentially like court, I guess. Similar. I mean, it means somebody else has a decision on it. There's a tribunal or there's outside. I'm fine with that. I mean, that's okay, though the word court isn't used. But do you understand what her translation more importantly says? Baby didn't die. The fetus didn't die. It wasn't terminated. The King James seems to say it's terminated. The Hebrew seems to say it's terminated, but that translation doesn't say it's terminated. Just that's the new IV. That's the NIV, New International Version. It's a very, very common, well-read, like if you go to a church, the NIV Bible translation, whatever the Bible says on the front, it's oftentimes the New International Version. So it's a much different translation, because the outcome of that translation is that the fetus never died. So of course there doesn't need to be a life for a life or there's no life. Yeah, John.
Who makes that translation? Who makes that determination? If wait. If this is it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do they get to improvise?
Well, okay. So one would say that at least from the standpoint of, and I happen to like the New International Version. I'm a little disappointed with the liberties that they took on this one, because sometimes it's simply the way you're going to punctuate a line. So, for example, I'm going to show you this right here. It's a good discussion, and it's a good thing to bring up in discussion because it is important. So I have a link, a site that I use a lot. It's called Bible Gateway. And what I like about Bible Gateway is that it has every translation. So I can go to Exodus chapter 21. It says, here's New International Version, which I didn't actually choose. I didn't do that just now. That was just happened to be the last translation I looked at because I like the new IV. So here's the translation for this line. You just heard it. She just read it. And by the way, I mean, why they put it with a paragraph like that, I don't know, because it actually doesn't do very well if you're going to include the life for a life in the same. I mean, they did it for a reason, and they really almost changed the whole intention of this part, because they almost said the baby didn't die, but if there's serious injury, you take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. So it's almost as if that next line is part of that law. No other, well, let me just show you. That's not what it is in the English that we have at all. And they literally made that a paragraph. So they're basically saying the line of life for life is connected to the previous verse. They did that by putting it in a paragraph. That was also an intent. So sometimes I'll say, look, okay, that there's no punctuation in the Torah. They could do that. Anybody could do. Anyone has a freedom to that. You should still be able to justify it. But they completely changed not only that line, but they also, by putting that line, a life for a life, they made it like it was this, and that if essentially, if the baby died, maybe, then it's a life for life. Not that it is for everything, because this line, we take that line, lex talionis line, most people would say that's the basis for the law of life for life in the Torah. That had nothing to do with this one. But so it's not specifically for that. But so not particularly for the pregnant woman. But here, like, let's look, for example, let's look at, I mean, I don't even use the New Catholic Bible. I'm not sure what that one is, but here's the one of the main Catholic Bibles, the New American Bible, which is, I mean, they have the New American Standard. You can see how many they have. But look at, so this is
Only one.
I know. That's right, John. There's only one. So this is the Catholic translation. Let's go with the Catholic translation. And here they did the same thing. So they put it as one paragraph. But look at what they did. They followed, she gives birth prematurely and there is no injury, right? So you can see that they did the same thing. Essentially, they did the same thing. Now look at, and you heard what the King James did. So I mean, I'll show you at least the way this is the authorized King James. This is a newer, I need to go to just the King James. So look at the King James. Even the Christian sites give you a lot of pop-up ads. Anyways, they have it as a separate line. And as you heard Mary say, her fruit depart from her, which doesn't seem to be that well, I guess you could say maybe it didn't die. I mean, maybe fruit depart from her isn't death. Let's look at the well, this is one of the really good translations I said that a lot of people do, the New Revised Standard. You can see there's a different version of it. There's a new Revised Standard Catholic edition, and then there's a New Revised Standard Updated edition. So let's look at this. Here's one. Look at the New Revised Standard version. When people are fighting injure a pregnant woman so that there's a miscarriage, yet no further harm follows, the one responsible shall be fined as much as the woman's husband demands, paying as much as the judges determine. They still use the judges there, but that's fine. But look at this one. No, this one, the New Revised Standard version uses the word miscarriage, which seems to be the intent without making a political statement about what it is. But I mean, look, this is one of the most highly charged verses. I would say this verse and the verse about homosexuality are the two most highly charged verses in the whole Bible. I mean, honestly, I don't think anything has a more, I would say, relevant and debated in the modern day than this. Let me just look at one other one. You can see a lot of these are Protestant translations. Some of them are more modern. This one's a new one. Let's see what they did with this one. Yeah, this one, she gives birth prematurely. So again, it doesn't seem to be that she does that. It's a miscarriage. A miscarriage pretty as much the baby died. You don't say it miscarried and the baby still lived.
On the NIV version,
Yep.
there was a little footnote.
Yeah.
If you click on that, will it show anything?
Oh, yeah. Let's look at that.
Says, I mean, I'm assuming it's miscarriage. Just
Well,
by,
yeah, but I mean, the intent of retranslating this is huge. So let's see the note. Yeah, let's see the note. That's a good point. There's a footnote here. Oh, there you go, Glory. There you go, Glory. I know. And you have to hit the footnote. Yeah, I know. So there was an intent to retranslate it this way. Now you can make the argument, I'm looking at Mary because not that she owns the King James, but you can make the argument that the King James translation allows for that type of maybe an understanding. Let me just look at one other one to see. Well, let's just see. Yeah, you can look at that one. Yeah, that's what the one I actually meant to hit was the I don't know who I can't remember this Orthodox Jewish Bible. I can't remember what the translation that they're using on this is. It's just as Orthodox. like most of it's not even translated. So like everywhere it says Amma or Adon, that's the Hebrew. So let's see what the way they translated it. Because every time it says Ish, it means a man. So here's what it says. Oh, it says, so she gives birth prematurely, but not with an injury. Yeah, they went with premature too. So you can see. Now, I just want to say, yeah, so there's Jews who translate. Look, and she hit you with that. She hit you with that. Let me just see if they have the Jewish publication. See, they don't have the Jewish Publication Society. Now, look, I'm going to tell you something. I don't know what the complete Jewish, but I don't think that's actually Jewish people that did that. And I don't even know that, by the way, look, this site I think the site's really good. But it is run by evangelical Christians for the most part. So there's translations that they don't even carry. But I do like the new. To me, this one is one of the best. I mean, it's normally Christian translation, but one of my biblical teachers, Richard Friedman, told me years ago that the New Revised Standard Version is the best translation in English. That's not, that's just like if you want to know what's actually in the Bible, that's the best one without, any, commentary inside the translation. Like they didn't try to make it comfortable for people. So he actually said that, and I never thought about the way they translated that line, but that's a pretty important line to translate. There's some translations, by the way, if you go to some verses that we could talk about, like the one from Leviticus about not lying with a man like you lie with a woman, there's not a lot of gray area there. It's pretty much, if you look at a line, I'm just going to show you just real quick, because as I said, that's one of the most, what is that? This is not an Orthodox Jewish Bible. I know this is, that's what I'm even wondering, because they had a bunch of Christian text on that. So I don't know. I don't know that any of these are really Jewish Bible translations, by the way. I just want to tell you, but I don't care, because this is, there's no other site where you can look at all these different translations at one time. So I just want to point out there's things that are really good about it, and there's things that are not so helpful. But so let's look at the line about the way they translate that line that I just said about people who are gay. Oh, wait a second. Here, right here. This was, by the way, your son Sam's Torah portion, which we didn't talk about when he was in religious school. But here's the line about having sex with a man. Wait a second. Where am I here? Depraved. If a man has sexual relation, here it is, right here. Hold it a second. Did I skip over it?
13.
Yeah, here it is. Sorry. It's hard for me to see in the, so what they did here is they put everything together in one paragraph. So here it is. If a man, this is the New Revised Standard. If a man lies with a male as a woman, both of them have committed abomination. They should be put to death. Their blood is upon them. So that's the New Revised. Well, that's the Catholic. But I guarantee you, the New Revised Standard is the same. So if you look at the New International Version, the NIV, you can see there's a New IV English and a New IV American, because we speak different languages. Yeah, here you go. If a man does, both of them have done what is detestable. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. They're both be put to death. I mean, it's almost the same word. It's detestable versus abomination, or whatever the word that they use. So, the translation on this one's not going to be phenomenally different in the different. It's not really going to give us a, look. I mean, just look quickly at the King James. There's not a lot you can do with that one. Here's the King James, the original King James. It says right here, if a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them had committed abomination, they shall surely be put to death.
It's consistent.
It's pretty consistent. There's only a question of how you're going to translate the word toeva. Are you going to call it an abomination, or are you going to call it detestable, whatever? I mean, that's it. Let's see it. What do you have in yours, John?
Same.
What, abomination?
If a man lies with a man, a male, as one lies with a woman, the two of them have done an abhorrent thing.
Yeah, abhorrent thing. That's the way the Jews translated it, is abhorrent. It's not quite as bad as abomination.
Death and the blood guilt upon.
Yeah, and as we said before, it's the same word that's used, by the way, for eating non-kosher meat. So obviously the penalty is a little stronger, but
Yes.
it is essentially the same word as an abomination. So why am I doing that? We're done with this.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
And a woman and her mother. Oh, gee.
well, so John, I mean, in all fairness, there's something wrong with that guy. Anyways,
Well, the land.
yeah,
I seem to remember something on Shameless
about that. Yeah, it is a biblical law. But
I haven't gotten down.
yeah, it is, anyways, we'll get to that.
Get back to
So
that.
let's get back, but it is obviously a very important translation. And it does get to this issue of who has the ability to translate this. And that's why I point out what the actual Hebrew says, so that we can kind of make our own terminations on it. All right, so then we read about the life for a life, and then we read about slaves. What happens when we get to a slave? We didn't get to this part here, which is when a slave owning party strikes the eye of a slave, male or female, and destroys it, that person shall let the slave go free on account of the eye. So if you hit your slave so hard that he loses an eye, he's free. Which again, you better not beat your slave. Now you say that's pretty serious, but look at this next one. If the owner knocks out the tooth of a slave, male or female, that person shall let the slave go free on account of the tooth. So that's like much easier to do, I would think. So if you hit somebody, it doesn't say lashings, right? But it means that if you did some kind of damage to someone that was that serious, even the loss of a tooth, that's serious, you're out. If it's your,
Oh, God.
so the point here is that you have a high standard, a bar of treating slaves with compassion that you didn't even have in American history. Now we get into a very actually interesting law in the Torah. It is commented, there's a lot of commentary in it. I remember studying this in Talmud. You'd be like, oh, really? But look at it. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox is not to be punished. Okay, so if you have a wild animal, especially an ox that gores, it killed somebody. It's not just that it hurt the person, it killed them. You kill the animal, and there is
But you can't eat it.
yeah, you can't eat it. Yeah, you don't eat it. It doesn't, there's no benefit you're going to get from it. But the party who's responsible isn't that you don't do anything. But read the next law. If, however, that ox has been in the habit of goring, and its owner, though warned, has failed to guard it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner too shall be put to death. So here's a really important law. And like the Torah kind of opens the door to this thing, which is if this is a situation where it should have been controlled, people knew that this was a disaster waiting to happen, then you're responsible for it. So it's interesting that, you have a rule which basically says, well, the person's not fully responsible for their animals unless their animals are violent and people have known that this could happen and it didn't come out of nowhere. Now, this really is something where, well, that's why it's in the Talmud. It opens up a whole can of worms.
It really does.
And so then it gets to be like, well, how did anybody know? Did it hurt somebody? Did it hurt another animal? Did it hurt a person? Did someone witness it? Who knows it? Is it well known? All of these kind of things, because it opens it up to look, the guy could be killed if his animal did
Somebody
this.
has vicious dogs.
So 100%. So this is actually exactly right, Doreen. There is modern equivalents of this, which are that people have dogs that can do this.
Right?
Like Ramsey.
Like my dog. Yeah, right. Sure.
Sorry.
Like your
Game of Thrones.
your dogs, my dogs. Yes, but there is
Like,
there are dogs that
I
are,
was just gonna say pit bulls. People have
yes.
that.
And so some people say that if there's a breed of dog that people know are violent, then, and people breed them and people keep them for that reason. Pit bulls, yes.
But that's not so- They have a, they have a.
Okay, but Joanne, let's face it. People maintain and keep those dogs and keep, maybe not pit bulls, but other dogs. I don't want to pick on any dog, okay, Joanne? But there are dogs that people breed for a reason because they're,
Dogs that are fighters, fighting dogs.
I understand. So they know that. They want to be tough. They want to show other people, their neighbors, that they have a tough dog.
That's ridiculous.
But you know it's true.
Yes, I know it's true. but it's
So
ridiculous.
they have to deal with the consequences if that dog then goes attack somebody. So you can't have it both ways. So if you want to be like that and you do things like that to a dog and you do want to have, and you have to deal with the consequences. That's all we're saying.
What about stupid people, like the running of the bulls?
Well, that's an interesting question. So if you take your life in your own hands with a bull or with an animal, there is an actual, it's not in the Torah, but it's a principle that kind of comes out of this, which is that if you do that and you are risking your own life, then you are responsible. You are responsible for it. You shouldn't do it. And you're responsible for it and you shouldn't be doing it. And you are essentially forced, what they say that the phrase in Hebrew is you're forced in the hand of God. And so you're literally asking to be killed, which some people interpret pretty broadly, because in the Bible, they didn't have some of the stuff that we the extreme sports that we have today. But they did have people that ran with the bulls because they did have bullfights and they did have gladiator combat and they have those kind of things. And they said, look, if you engage in that kind of behavior, you're risking your own life. You're putting your life outside of the risks of normal risk. And that was,
That brings up another thing. Because when you go to war, you risk your life.
yeah, but we understood that you had to. If you were compelled,
But back in the 70s, you get drafted.
okay, so there is a Torah principle. You know what the Torah principle is? If you don't want to fight, I was going to say if you're a coward, if you don't want to fight, I should not have said that. If you do not want to fight, right? The Torah says you go back, right? The Torah literally says, we'll get to it in Deuteronomy. The commanding officer is supposed to say, if anybody here has just recently got married and has not had a chance to consummate their marriage, have a child, go back. If you just recently built a house, had a child to dedicate, of course, but we had ways of people getting out of Vietnam. There were no, stop. There were real ways that a lot of people got deferments, okay? A lot of ways. Okay, but some people figured out ways to get deferments, right? So the issue is that the Torah literally says that if you do not want to go, then the generals are the last thing the commander says is, are you afraid? Get out. And the Torah literally says, because that person is going to spread chaos and fear amongst the other soldiers. Get that person out. So the Torah says we don't want to draft people who are going to be like that. So the Torah literally says, to some extent, even though they do have this idea that there has to be a draft, and Israel today has the same thing. Israel will not draft people who do not want to serve. There are people who defer all the time. It's not a good thing to do unless you're willing to deal with the consequences of that, which people will say, why did you not serve? And then you'll have to answer that for the rest of your life. And there are people who do, and they're fine with it. And but it's not something that you do. It's not- Yeah, and most of them do their service too. There are some who opt out, and there's some who say, look, I have a career, but there's a whole lot of them who say, I have a career, but I also want to serve my country. Gal Gadot had no issue doing it. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who did their military service who had careers. If she was already a model, she didn't have to do her service. There's people who've gotten out for that, but I know people who had careers in sports and entertainment, and they did their service because they didn't want to feel like they had abandoned their country. So exactly, every single one of them. You look at those years that they was just looking at Pee Wee Reese the other day. Spent 3 years serving your cousin. Spent 3.
My mother's maiden
Okay,
name.
I know, but she's not your cousin. You're not from Kentucky. So ridiculousness. Yeah, he took out 3 years of his life. Yeah, he did not. He did not consider Mike his cousin. So anyways, yes, there were so many people who did it. It's beyond even commenting on, but yeah, the idea today that would happen. But anyways, that was an issue but that's not the issue. The issue was, should you get out of that kind of stuff? And that leads us to the question that Gloria originally asked, which is running with the bulls. Yes, that would extend to even jumping out of a plane if you didn't have to. If you had to, in order to train for the military, that's one thing. But if you did it because you wanted to have a good time jumping out of an airplane, based on Torah, my understanding of the Torah, you don't do it.
It would be the same with bungee jumping.
Yeah.
rope
If you're,
it's
yeah.
your fault.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've done what's it called? The zip lining.
Yeah.
I've done zip lining over areas that probably were too dangerous. Yeah, there was no surviving it. But so that's probably the most dangerous I did. But I always felt like not only was it like a little bit safer, but like maybe there was a chance that I wouldn't die, but that's probably this. Maybe there was, but yeah, I probably did. But that wasn't, like being in the ocean I shouldn't have died being in the ocean.
No, you shouldn't have.
I shouldn't have, but I was an idiot. I didn't, but it shouldn't have even been that close. Anyways, but I did learn. I mean, I'm not gonna do that again. So I did go in the ocean, by the way, two more times I've gone in the ocean. And I wasn't scared of, at least going in the ocean, but I definitely didn't get into an area. I'm not going to go in an area where there's no lifeguard. That's for sure. So I am more cognizant. I just didn't even think about it. So so that's what happens with a goring ox. So this is it's called the shore. That's the Hebrew for the ox, a shore. So yeah, there's a whole tractate in the Talmud that deals with the goring ox. If ransom is imposed, the owner must pay whatever is imposed to redeem the owner's own life. Now, so too, if it gores a minor, male or female, its owner shall be dealt with according to the same rule. But if the ox gores a slave, male or female, its owner shall pay 30 shekels of silver to the master, and that ox shall be stoned. So these are all the laws of the goring ox. So it starts here.
Specific.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting.
Yes. And what you come away with is that this happened. You had animals and people in these kind of situations. And of course, it could be goring a minor. And here, you come away with the fact that a slave is not, at the end of the day, is someone's property, which is why it comes up with this 30 shekels of silver. Why? Because that's the replacement value of a slave. So right here, you see what a life of a slave was worth, which was 30 shekels of silver. It's a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but that's what the value was of the person. Yeah.
So this is, old law. Are there still, like Orthodox that follow this?
So I will say this, it's in the Talmud, and it's a huge section of the Talmud, these discussions, this one and the next one that's in it. And I would say that yes, from the standpoint of, well, most Jews don't keep livestock around the house or around their property, but they do have, there are things like dogs, and there are things like people taking accountability for, for their actions. So I would say this, from this, it wasn't obviously just oxes, right? So if people had a horse that, would go crazy and you would take off and start running around and kicking people, the same thing. So it wasn't just oxes. It was, it could be other animals. And so, so this is the ox, I said, is the shore. Okay, these are all laws of, this whole thing is just about them. The next thing is, in Hebrew, is a pit. In Hebrew, that's a bore. So in Hebrew, it rhymes, the shore and the bore. And the shore and the bore are like, in Jewish law, when people talk about it, even to this day, they're talking about what happens in civil damages, where the damage is serious. These are serious issues. So this one is probably even more relevant. It says when a person opens a pit, or when a party digs a pit, any party digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or an ass falls into it, the one responsible for the pit must make restitution, paying the price to the owner, but keeping the dead animal. So you just bought yourself an animal. You killed it. It's yours. You get to have the benefit of at least having a dead animal, but you're responsible for it, and you have to pay back the full value of it. So that's the obvious one. And so, well, we'll read a little bit more. When a party's ox injures a neighbor's ox and it dies, and they shall sell the live ox and divide its price, they shall also divide the dead animal. However, this gets back into the ox goring in a second, but you can see from this is that they're trying to determine the liability that somebody has, and they're basically saying you can't claim that if you dug a hole that you're not responsible for it. The person who dug it is responsible for it, and if they left it there for a reason, that's their reason, but it's also they're responsible for it. So they may have dug the hole because they wanted to have a water, cistern, and they may have wanted to. They were maybe using it for their planting. They were digging a pit because they were either using it for a channel or for reservoir, or let's say even that they're using it for animals. Fine, whatever the reason is, they're responsible for it once they dig it. And if they don't fill it back up and somebody gets hurt in it, including the animal, they're now responsible for it. And I would say that that's probably more relevant to us today than an animal, because a lot of us don't own animals, or at least animals that are going to hurt people. But we can create a situation so that we create a responsibility where we might be liable for something because we created a situation where someone can get hurt. And so this is a major issue. It's one of the reasons why our synagogue has insurance policies, so that if somebody trips on our
cement for your driveway
or the parking lot.
Yeah, but they left all this,
Yeah, but they trimmed the shrubs and trees.
and they left it all there.
Well, they're coming back tomorrow. They're almost done.
You know, they're-
I know. I don't think they realized that we were going to be in here tonight necessarily, but yeah, you could see that they're doing that. But part of the reason we did that was so that people wouldn't get hurt as they were walking around the trees. So that's why they were trimmed in the first place. Okay, the branches will be cleaned up tomorrow. 100%. You can still see the blower is still out there. They're not done. So we're going to, but it is an issue, and we put in more lights out there because someone almost tripped on the parking lot once, right, Joyce?
That's good. That's good.
So you have to have those things where you're the party responsible. You don't create situations where someone could get hurt. And so this is a big issue. I mean, believe me, this is a very big issue. And it's one of the reasons why you can make the argument it's better never to own a building that anyone else lives in, because yeah, you don't want that. You don't want that headache, because we're a very litigious society today, and it's bad enough that if somebody gets hurt in your house, they could turn around and sue you. But if you own a building, or if you own an apartment building or anything else, you're going to be responsible for somebody. It's a tough one, because the Torah does say you're responsible for it. The Torah doesn't say you're not responsible for it, but we live in a society where you don't know where it's going to end. There's no real limitation on how much you can get sued for. The lawyers,
Well, there is a limitation.
there is, but it's virtually unknown.
The money runs out, the money runs out.
I understand, but that if you happen to have the deep pockets, what am I telling you for? You know this better than anybody. As a property owner,
Going back to that, though, it only mentions animals, it mentions nothing about humans.
about being hurt.
So I went back to the, make sure I didn't get it wrong, and it said laws on worship.
Yeah.
serfdom, And injury.
Yeah.
It's interesting how they don't mention humans.
Yeah. So the Talmud does. And so because this got opened up, the pit got opened up. The discussion on the pit goes way far because they realize that, yeah, if an animal can get hurt, people can get hurt in the pit too. So that's why the discussion in the Talmud is so much greater than this. So if you look at it, it's pages and pages of discussion in the Talmud on these liability issues. And it all comes down again to this portion and the fact that again, in Hebrew, it kind of let me just show you. The goring ox is, yeah, if you look up it, let me just show you. It's literally the beginning of a whole tractate of the Bible. Let me just show you. Let me just show you. Hold it. So, look, with the ox, it's clear that there could be an ox that is known as a goring ox, or an ox that it just happened to be a fluke. But let me just show you this one. So, actually, I could have shown you right from Sepharia. So this wonderful thing that we use to show the Torah also has the Talmud on it. So here's the tractate Baba Kama, which is the tractate, the first tractate on civil damages. Okay. So look how it begins. So Parak 1, right? This is the first page of this. When an ox gores a man or woman and they die, the ox shall be stoned. There's the line from Torah. These are the lines from Torah. And hold it a second. So this is the introductions. Okay, so let me get to the actual page. You actually see let me show the actual page of this. This is the introduction. Here.
Animal or person, right there.
Yeah, and so this is just the explanation of what falls, but this is so let me just show you the big. So this is the explanation. I'll even show you the whole thing, but so this is all commentary about what the Talmud says about it. So everywhere it talks about the Gemara, they're talking about the later section of the Talmud, the second section. So so here, the Gemara cited one opinion whose list included 24 different categories, most of them caused by damage directly or indirectly by a person. So what happens is that so let me just get into I'm going to open up the actual tractate. So this is Baba Kama, liability and compensation for damages, right? So if we go to the first page, page 2, right? There are 4 primary categories of damage: the ox, the pit, the mave, and fire. So it says right here, the 4 categories of damage are ashor v'habor, right? Ashor v'habor. So this is the way, like when people start digging into Talmud, this is it. So here you go. So they go into all of these categories, which again, we didn't get into fire and and into trampling, to this stuff. But so, but like for here, so just to show you how they translate the Talmud here, everything that's is in bold is the literal text. Everything that's not bold is commentary to help you understand what you just read. Because the Talmud is essentially written in shorthand. So every time, if you read it, it would say, and what is there between a primary category and a subcategory? Difference, one performs two primary categories together, alternatively two subcategories. All those words in the middle are not there. So if you don't have that and you're reading this, that's all you get in the Hebrew. That's all you get in the Hebrew and Aramaic. But that's how much you need to have filled in by the commentary. That's why the Talmud is really so hard to study. So here you go. I mean, these are just, this then gets into other categories. And I mean, and you look at these things, you're like, oh my gosh, this just comes off of one thing. We haven't even gotten into, the whole yet. But, this is what happens in the Talmud. One line from the Talmud, and even you could say, well, there's a few lines about the gory ox, but you can see this goes on. I will tell you, this is going to be Bava Kama is, I'll tell you how many pages it is. It's this section. So there's three sections of civil laws: Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Batra, right? So Bava Kama is essentially what we're studying, what we just talked about, right? Bava Metzia is about finding things from people. Like if you find a cloak in it's in the Torah, you found a cloak, what do you do with it? So that's what that's about. And Bava Batra is more about property, about ownership. So this is just Bava Kama. Bava Kama goes on for 119 pages, double-sided.
Wow.
There's A and B page, right? So A and B page means that it's 240 pages just on that.
Was that part of your education?
Yeah. So then the question is can you read all the Talmud? Yeah, but it takes forever. I mean, the Talmud is 72 volumes in the translation. Yeah, no, I got that's the English translation. If you get it only in the Hebrew Aramaic, then it's only, it's only like it could be like 6 volumes or 10 volumes, depending on how they break up the volumes. But with the translation, some of the volumes, like Bava Kama, just that section that I showed you was 119. That's 3 volumes. Bava Kama is 3 books. I'll show them to you next time you're around. There's 3 books just for Bava Kama. There's 3 books just for Bava Batra. So
You still want to do that?
well, yeah, but when you study, John, when you study this stuff, like nobody ever asks me, this is the end of Bava Kama. This is literally the last page, right? Nobody asks me if you purchase a spotted garment and there's warp and what. Nobody's going to ask me about this.
The law, though, I mean,
Correct, which is
it's interesting. That was found a few years ago in the
correct. So we studied the parts of the Talmud that were more. They were more. We did brachot and we did avodah zarah. We did tractates that were more. I would say brachot deals with blessings, so it was a little bit more relevant. Look, this is my point. Rabbis they did not do what I do. They did not visit people in the hospitals. They did not do weddings. They did not do services. They didn't get in front of people and do a sermon. For 2,000 years,
They study.
90% of what rabbis did was study and dispense decisions. They were lawyers / judges. That's all they did. So they did have to read all this because they had to decide Jewish law. And so we don't have to do that now. But that's exactly why Mishpatim, this Torah portion that we're reading right now, is so important, was because this is what most rabbis studied, and they studied that. They didn't have to teach. They didn't have to do those kind of things that we do today. They literally were sitting there giving people law, and they'd say, okay, well, what's the law? And by the way, the Talmud was just the beginning, because then they would go through halakha, they would go through these other books, and each one of these books, was a later commentary, whether it was the Mishnah Torah from Maimonides in the 12th century, or whether they were going through the Kitzur Shulchan, the Shulchan Aruch. Forget the Kitzur Shulchan. That's the abridged version. That was the simple version. The big one was the 16th century. The Shulchan Aruch, you had to do that. And this went on all the way to the Aruch HaShulchan, which was 19th century. And then, of course, it comes into the more modern era where there's these commentators that are at the end here, the Achronim. These are 16th through 20th century people. And so some of these people, you know, the Vilna Gaon lived in the 18th century, late 18th century, but goes all the way here to people who are in the modern era, where you can get into, you know, more contemporary things, which is, you know, Rav Moshe Feinstein, which he wrote about, end of life issues, about, how to, what people have to do as far as, what happens when someone's ill, terminally ill. So these are, and again, what do? They go back to the Talmud. So they go back to here, they go back to these discussions in the Talmud. And if they can, obviously they go back to the Torah. But a lot of times they have to go into the Talmud because the Talmud is so much more comprehensive about law than the Torah. But yeah, this is what people still do. And so the great thing about this is all online now. When I was in rabbinical school, this was like,
So who married?
You gotta go to the steps.
Who married the Jewish people back then?
and a lot of it wasn't in translation. That's what really would get you. What?
Who married the Jewish people back then?
So they would have usually a camp. Like, first of all, the rabbi might be there as a witness, but the cantor would sing the songs. The cantor would do the ceremony. The rabbi might read the ketubah because maybe not he's the only one, but the uncle could read the ketubah. Anybody could read the ketubah. Marriage wasn't, the rabbi would be there, but he didn't necessarily do anything. Like I know in Fiddler on the Roof, they have like a rabbi there, but it was basically the couple, the guy getting in front of the community going, I take this woman to be my wife. And then the cantor would sing the blessings and that was it. That was it. The couple would come out, they do a walk down and the man would say that. The cantor would read the chazan would read sing the songs, the 7 blessings, and that was it. That was it. So the ketubah wasn't usually read in the service because the ketubah was probably signed a year before and was a legal document. People were literally sitting with that ketubah and they were there. All right, let's get to the next law because this one's a good one. You'll like this one. If a thief is seized while tunneling and beaten to death, there is no blood guilt in that case. If the sun had already risen, there is blood guilt in the case. The thief must make restitution, and if lacking the means, shall be sold for the theft. So let's just mention this for a second. This is the story of somebody tunneling into your house. He tunnels into your house. You catch him while he's tunneling into the house. If you catch him while he's tunneling in your house, you have a right to kill him.
What's the difference between night and day?
Well, let's read that. If the sun had risen, there is blood guilt in the case. The thief must make restitution, and if lacking the means, shall be sold for the theft. So what do you think just happened in this?
The night won't be lit.
Yeah. Now, the weird thing is that what's your translation, Mary?
Which verse?
Verse 2.
If he found breaking up, and if he let him die, there shall be no blood, he should.
Yeah. And what's the next verse?
If the sun rises on him, there shall be bloodshed. For he should make full restitution. If he have nothing, then he shall be sold for his life.
And what's your translation say, Glory?
Well,
For verse 2.
I wanted to say, this is so weird because my version has a completely different verse 1. than
Oh,
yours. But
Yeah, it's
so-
slightly off. Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, so if a thief is caught breaking in and is struck so that he dies, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, he is guilty of bloodshed. Oh, it keeps going. A thief must certainly make restitution, but if he has nothing, he must be sold to pay for his theft.
Yeah. So,
So when he's saying being sold, does that mean into slavery?
yeah, but that's different. Has nothing to do with the first 2 lines. This is why it's kind of silly that they grouped it like this. Did they group it like that in your translation? Mary, is the King James? So what they're really talking about here is that if someone tunnels into your house at night and you catch them and you beat them to death, then there is no, you're fine with that. If they tunneled into your house during the day and you killed them, you are liable. The next line, if you make restitution, if the thief must make restitution, if lacking the means, shall be sold for the theft. That has nothing to do with the previous line. That has nothing to do with the, that has nothing to do with the son.
Breaks in the daytime and you kill him, you're guilty?
Yes.
Yes.
it says.
So why does, okay, so this is the question, right? So let me just show you. Can anybody guess why there's a difference?
Wait, why you're alive at night and dead in the day?
No,
Dead at night.
no, you're dead at night. You get killed at night, but you don't have the right to kill somebody. There is, you have a problem if you killed the guy while, if you broke in during the
I
day.
have a.
What's the footnote? Let's see what Gloria's footnote.
Killing an intruder in broad daylight is not justifiable. I guess because you.
Is that what you're gonna say? I mean, that's the traditional answer. I was just gonna show you, let's see if it's the traditional answer from here is Rashi. Yeah.
But they didn't have lights back then.
Yeah, but
They
if,
had candles.
yeah, but here's the thing. Yeah, it doesn't say, Rashi doesn't, it doesn't, it's not in the Rashi commentary, but it is in the traditional Jewish commentary. Exactly what Gloria just said. Why? Because the understanding, the reckoning is, as Gloria's commentary said, if somebody breaks into your house at night, is tunneling into your house and you catch them while they're tunneling into your house, you can kill them. Why? Because the understanding is they were going to kill you. They were going to kill you.
It's self-defense. That's
So if they were coming into your house at night, they expected you to be there and they were going to rob you and they would kill you because you were sleeping and they would catch you, they would hurt you. If they came in during the day, the assumption was they didn't think you were home. So they had no intention of hurting you. They only wanted to steal from you. Now, I know that sounds weird, but that was the logic, was that no one in broad daylight would come into your house, try to sneak into your house with any other intent but to steal. But if you came into someone's house at night,
you were gonna kill.
you were going to kill them because you expected to find them at home. And you could make the argument, well, I wanted to just rob them while they were sleeping, but that's not likely going to happen. And they're saying it's not likely going to happen because once you come into their house, you're going to make a noise, they're going to catch you, and you're going to kill them. You assumedly we're going to kill them. So that's why there's a difference. I know it seems kind of weird because you'd say like, well, it's just you're defending yourself, period. Doesn't matter what time of day it is. Now, it does say you can't kill them, but you are responsible. So that if the family of that intruder wants to come after you, they can, and then you have to defend yourself. So they don't want people to do that. So they really don't want people to kill someone if they came in during the day. But I guess if the answer would be, well, hey, your cousin came in and broke into my house while we were sleeping and I killed them, you'd have to say, okay, well, my cousin deserved to die and I can't do anything about it. So that's kind of what they're saying. And they're trying to prevent someone from doing that during the day. Now, the last part, though, that he has to make restitution and if lacking the means shall be sold for the theft means that you have to make up for what you stole, right? And so that's really the point of the last part, which is, someone's responsible for what they steal. Now, it's not the end, right? But if what was stolen, whether ox or ass or sheep, is found alive and in hand, that person shall pay double. Wow. So that gives you an idea that there's damages that are paid for that. Okay, so that's pretty serious. It gets better. When any party who owns livestock lets it loose to graze in another's land and so allows a field or vineyard to be grazed bare, restitution must be made for the impairment of that field or vineyard, which makes sense. When a fire is started and spreads to thorns so that standing or growing grain is consumed, the one who started the fire must make restitution. Oh, that makes sense, right? When any party gives money or goods to another for safekeeping and they are stolen in that party's house, if caught, the thief shall pay double. If the thief is not caught, the owner of the house shall depose before God and deny laying hands on the other's property. And it says, God, guess what it's going to say here? See note 21.6, which is also, as we saw before, Judges. right? Because it says Ha Elohim. We talked about that before, that the word Elohim could sometimes mean judges and sometimes it means God. So, and so the owner of the house shall go before the person and say, in all charges of misappropriation pertaining to an ox, an ass, or a sheep, a garment, or any other loss, whereof one party alleges this is it, the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God declares guilty shall pay double to the other. So this, that is why there's a whole tractate on it in the Talmud, right? So as I showed you, the Baba Batra, which is about finding things, that is exactly what's in that. Oh, not Baba Batra, Baba Metzia. Baba Metzia, the second section. So there's three: Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Batra. Baba Metzia is all about finding things and what happens in those cases. And again, there's so many possibilities, right? Because even for like this one, it says in here that if you have someone's livestock get stolen, right? Now, what happens if you find someone's livestock, right? And you take it home with you, and then that livestock has babies. And then the person comes back and says, that's my goat. That's my, well, it's got his stamp on it, right? It's got his brand on it. They had branding back then. And they said, that's mine. And then you say, well, what about the babies? Who owns the babies? Right? Who do you think owns the babies?
One stole it.
Well, no, let's say they didn't steal it. They found it.
One found it.
Nope.
Uh-oh.
Gotta give it back to the owner. Gotta give it back to the owner.
Was it
The
just
animal
almost
was
pregnant
stealing, no.
when it was found?
If the animal.
They don't say that. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
The person takes somebody's goat that's branded, they know it's not theirs.
Yeah, but let's say they didn't take it in this case. I'm just saying that it wandered over. They found it. And they took it back and they raised it. They have to give it back, and they have to give back any of the benefit derived from that.
It's branded, but it's returned.
Now you can make the argument they did benefit from it while they was living with them. So if they got milk or hair or whatever, the stuff from it, the wool or whatever from a sheep, milk from a cow, you get to derive that benefit. But you have to give them any babies born back. Now, these are laws based on this. So these are all laws about ownership of things, liability for things. And as you can see, in some cases, stuff that gets stolen. So look at this. If somebody has something and you are taking care of it for somebody and it gets stolen, the thief has to pay double. Because essentially they have to pay the person back who they stole and also the person who they stole from. Because they turn that person into someone who is untrustworthy. So they have to pay for that damage too, which is that they made the person who was holding it for somebody else, to some extent, they made them an accessory to their thievery. It was not their fault. So these are all laws that are, again, supposed to prevent people from stealing and doing those kind of things. So you can see here, this next law. When any party gives to another an ass, an ox, or a sheep, or any other animal to guard, and it dies or is injured or is carried off with no witness about, an oath before Adonai shall decide between the two of them that one has not laid hands on the property of the other. The owner must acquiesce, and no restitution shall be made. So the benefit goes to the person who was taking care of it. But they have to promise on oath to God. So they have to swear. And here the word for God is Adonai, right? It says an oath to God. But if the animal was stolen from the guardian, restitution shall be made to the owner. If it was torn by beasts, the guardian shall bring it as evidence, not needing to replace what has been torn by beasts. When any party borrows an animal from another and it dies or is injured, the owner not being with it, restitution shall be made. So there is responsibility of the person who is guarding it. Right? And um,
They really thought this out. For
yeah.
Every single, situation.
But you think they did, Gloria, and then you read the Talmud and then you're like, oh yeah, but what about that?
But that's when they flesh everything.
Everything. And each one of this, what I said, there's, so Baba Kama, what you saw was 119 pages, double-sided, 240 pages. Baba Metzia is the same thing. And Baba Batra is roughly the same thing too. So like I said, each one of those books on my shelf is 3 volumes. So it's 9 volumes. Those Bava, by the way, in Aramaic means gate. So Baba or Bob means gate. And so Baba Kama means the first gate, Baba Metzia is the middle gate, and Baba Batra is the final gate. But each of those gates, if you will, are 3 volumes in English translate with the Aramaic and the Hebrew, the Aramaic Hebrew, and then the translation alongside it. And then what happens is that, so that's 9 volumes.
How'd you get through all that?
I didn't get through all of it with the translation, which in a sense is even weirder because I wish I had the English translation, but when I was in rabbinical school, they were working on a really comprehensive English translation, the Art Scroll version, which is what I have at home. But they had only done, I was going to say they only did the beginning. They didn't do the beginning. They decided which tractates to translate first. And they didn't translate it in order necessarily. So what happens then, there was a very old English translation, which is what's on this. The English translation of the Talmud that they have on Safaria is an old English translation. It's not a great English translation, but it's the only one that existed for a long time. It's public domain, which is why they put it up. The translation the Art Scroll did of the Talmud was done in the 90s, I guess started in the late 80s, went into the 90s, and was finished about 20 years ago. But it was not finished by the time I was done with rabbinical school. So all you had to do if you were a teacher of Talmud is just not give anybody any work to do from the newer translation. As long as it hadn't been translated, if they give you something that hadn't been translated yet, you were in for it because the English translation did not help. It was clear if you use that English translation, you were better off just trying to translate it yourself because the English translation was not great. And they would know, the teacher would know if you came in with a translation from what there was, they would know that you use that translation. But the New English translation is really good, is really quite good. It has a lot of commentary and it's really, really good. And so it's much better if you're a student of Talmud now, much better. But I haven't gone through it all because it's 72 volumes and it is, well, I won't make it complicated, but there's even a better English translation that came out a few years ago, but they haven't finished it yet. That one, the Koran translation of the Talmud, they're still working on. And that one has got pictures in it and it's really good translation. It came out of American rabbis in Israel who worked on it and it's really good. So there's even a better English translation that'll eventually come out. But anyways, the good thing is that if I ever have to consult the Talmud, I have a good translation and but I use it so infrequently. They're very rarely does somebody say, hey, what is the Talmud? What is in the Talmud on this? It doesn't come up a lot. But it is amazing how much there is. I mean, amazing how much text there is on each one of these things. And they go off on tangents. Now, so let's look at the next line. This one's a good one because it deals with family law, which is not even in the sections that we talked about. The sections we talked about were all civil law up until now. There's a whole tractate, a whole section of the Talmud on family law. It's called Nashim. So there's Nashim and then there's Nezikin. So here we go. If a man seduces a virgin for whom the bride price has not been paid and lies with her, he must make her his wife by payment of a bride price. If her father refuses her to give her to him, he must still weigh out the silver in accordance with the bride price of virgins.
That's fair.
This is not only fair, not only is this fair, Joanne, this was way ahead of its time and is still ahead of its time in certain Middle Eastern cultures, where the woman is essentially the property of the man now. He pays for her, the husband now owns her, and she has no say over the marriage. And that's still in existence in lots of parts of the world. The reality is the Torah literally says, if you do that, the father of the bride, of the woman, she's not a bride necessarily, The father can make the decision, I don't want to give you my daughter, and therefore you still have to pay me for it. So to engage in premarital sex in Jewish community, you are at your own risk, Joanne. Let's put it that way. It could be very expensive. And what could happen, of course, is that your father would have to pay for your mistake or your transgression or your indiscretion. And therefore, you probably were going to get a beating, at least, if not worse. So the reality is that it's a huge risk. Clearly, though, in some cases, this wound up in people being married maybe earlier than they wanted to be, because if the man and the woman were a good match, and if they did want to be married, there is at least the ability for that to happen. So it's not like the woman is literally ruined because, the father, the father is going to say, look, I can't do anything about this. I guess the downside to this is that the father really does still get to make the decision on it. I would guess in most cases he got to consult with his daughter, but the reality is that if she slept with him in the first place, to some extent, the onus is on her. Now, it does say seduce. I don't know what's the translation. Gloria, what do you have?
Seduce. If a man seduces a virgin who is not pledged to be married and sleep with her, he must pay the bride price.
Yeah, the bride price is pretty clear. Does King James have seduce too? Yeah, okay. So in both places, they're kind of translating, they're translating it as that the bride price has not been paid. So that obviously she's still unmarried. Didn't need that commentary. That's obvious. But she's an unmarried woman. That's the category she's in. She's a betula, which is literally an unmarried woman, and it's usually translated as virgin.
Sounds like seduce and entice that means she's pretty much willing.
Correct. The problem, by the way, just so you know, and I just want to point this out, the word for virgin in Hebrew is betula. That's not actually the translation, just so you know, of what the Bible says about the mother of the Messiah. It does not necessarily is not a virgin. And why is that important? The Hebrew word that's used in Isaiah is an alma, which means a young woman. So technically speaking, in the Hebrew, in Isaiah, it says a woman, a young woman. An alma implies at least a woman who is still be able to give birth to a child. She will give birth to a child. This mistranslation of the word betula led to a concept of virgin birth, which the Bible didn't actually say that Jesus's mother had to be a virgin. So betula literally is a virgin or an unmarried, a woman who has not been married yet, but it's not the same as so this is a huge, how to translate this word betula. I only want to say that it's not just that whether it's seduced, but whether you translate it as a virgin. But yours says virgin, right? Maid. Okay. And yours says?
Virgin.
So you can see, even in the English translation, there's a variance. And here, they went with the Hebrew betula for virgin, which literally actually, I would say, if you're going to translate it literally, is unmarried. But it's not a horrible translation, virgin. What does yours say, John?
No, that was my point.
But what does yours say, virgin or not? Yeah.
But then it goes on to say, unbetrothed virgin, if she was betrothed.
Yeah, I think that's important to actually say betrothed, because betula is someone who's not been actually married yet. But the assumption is that she is eligible to be married, and she hasn't been married yet. But you can see the different translations.
You mentioned that it was the start of family law, and it's interesting to me, and I wanted to, maybe not for nobody else, but the segue, it's just like off a cliff.
Yep.
You went from beasts to seducing a virgin.
Yep.
And then the next one's even crazier, and the one after that, but
Yep.
it's very thin until you get to the end, and
Yep.
there must be more on family law.
It jumps around and again, obviously, part of the place where practical marriages at least are written out or in that section in Leviticus, but this is pretty important, which is what happens with a woman who is essentially, she's now in a category where she can't be a virgin anymore. And this is what the law, I mean, this is essentially the law. And then, as John points out, the next line doesn't relate to what we just said, which is you shall not tolerate a sorceress, which is let live. Because the word in Hebrew is lo tihyeh, which is chai, the word for chai, right? You shall not let her live. What is the translation, King James, Mary? To live, yeah. And what does yours say, Glory?
Do not allow a sorceress to live.
Yeah. So the Hebrew translation, if you notice it, and what does yours say, John?
You shall not tolerate it.
Yeah, so that's, I think your translation is actually it's the contemporary JPS. So it's pretty much the same. This is the 2006 version and yours is 1985, but they didn't make a lot of changes from 1985. You can see, if you see what it says right here, the Hebrew is pretty solid, which is you shall not let that person live. That's what it says. The next verse is actually, though, what you would say if you
I can't believe it's in there.
kill them. Whoever lies with a beast shall be put to death, which again, the King James is going to say, you shall surely put him to death, right? So mot yumat means you execute them. So that is very serious law. And again, you have sorcery, you have bestiality, and then it gets to whoever sacrifices to a god other than Adonai alone shall be proscribed. So there it doesn't actually say killed, it says yecharim, which means essentially to be excommunicated or banished. What's yours say, Glory? Yeah, harem could be, that's why they use proscribed, which is the word for.
But how do they tell who's a sorceress and who isn't? There's no explanation.
Well, it's why you have to come up with interesting ways to figure you have to hold them underwater to see what the thing. Wait, Mary, what does yours say for harem, for proscribed? What does it say? Utterly destroyed. So, yeah, the word harem there, look, we use the word harem to actually mean excommunicated today, but yeah, there's definitely a status where it's pretty serious. It's pretty serious punishment. But look, it doesn't really say. It says proscribed, which could be put to death. It could be utterly destroyed, and it could be, I mean, that's a big wide range. Excommunicated, utterly destroyed.
Well, with the Salem witch trials and stuff like that, somebody would just say you are a witch.
That's
Okay,
right.
okay, so you're right. So this is where this comes from. Okay, so this is where it comes from. And so people would say, literally, it says in the Torah, you shall not let, and this isn't the only place, by the way. This is one place. There's other places where it says you cannot let witches live.
Wow.
So,
Call someone a witch even if they're not.
well, wait, of course. I mean, look, the issue is that how do you know, right? And so there are discussions in the Talmud, and interestingly, by the way, let's just quickly see if there's any commentary here on this line in particular.
Then there must be slander and libel.
Yeah, and you could see, look what the Rashi commentary is. So Rashi wrote 500 years before the Salem. That was 1620. So he lived 500 years before in France. This does not mean that you may kill her, but she'll be put to death by the court. Both men and women who practice witchcraft are included in this law, but in using the feminine, scripture speaks of what is usually the case, or it is women who mostly practice witchcraft. And he is quoting the Talmud. So Sanhedrin, this is the Talmudic
So that's where
passage.
you have to provide evidence.
Yeah. So here is so I just went to it, I hyperlinked it. This is from 2,000 years ago. So Rashi is talking about 1,000 years ago, what he said. he's talking about now, this is from the Talmud, which is 2,000 years ago. So what does it say? This is all about people who are worshiping other gods. Let me just see if it actually says anything about it's talking about, let's see if it talks about witchcraft on this, or I had to go back. But yeah, this is the Talmud's commentary about it from 2,000 years ago. And you can see this is about getting witnesses to testify.
But
would
it include women who were using roots or leaves or stuff as medicines
Yeah,
and then be accused of witchery?
I don't think they're talking about here. I don't even, by the way, I don't even see the discussion about sorcery. Maybe I went over it.
Yeah, right there.
Here it is. Okay, so here's just so here you can see here. I don't see the where it talked about women though. So here they're talking about here. Okay, well, so here's what it says, right? So it says the warlock is also liable to execution by stoning. So it says that. So what are they talking about here? The one who performs a real act of sorcery is liable, and one who deceives the eye is exempt. So what are they talking about here? They're talking about someone who performs what we would consider today magic. If you're performing magic and it only appears that you're doing sorcery, you're not liable.
Oh.
But if you're doing it and you're actually doing witchcraft, you're liable for it. So they're not talking about people putting on a show. Right.
Sorcery.
So clearly they're talking about here people who are using stuff for their witchcraft.
Oh.
So they're talking about people that are doing it. And look at this, Joyce. They're talking about it. Okay, here it is. Both a man or a woman included. So this is the Talmud's discussion. So why does the verse state a witch? This is because most women are familiar with it. By the way, it doesn't say that most witches are women. It says most women are witches, which is a little different. I like that one. I like that one because most women are familiar with witchcraft. It doesn't even say that most women are. Oh my gosh, I love it. So they're familiar with witchcraft. Doesn't mean that they're witches, but they're familiar. And then it says, you shall allow nothing that lives. So the Canaanites were killed by the sword. So do administered by the sword. You shall not allow a witch to live. They're talking about other places where it says you have to kill things. So,
Wow.
so look, it's important because, by the way, this gets to the way that the witches would be executed, by the way. This is in the Talmud, right? So it says whether you strangulate them or whether, in this case, you stone them to death. So there's 4 different modes of execution in the Torah. Burning, the sword, which is usually considered like decapitation, cutting off the person's head, stoning them to death, and strangulation. So burning, stoning, the sword.
No sleeping pills, huh?
No, they only have that in strangulation. Strangulation is understood to be hanging, to be hung. Now, by the way, this is important because witches in this country, how did they execute them? Does anybody know?
At the stake.
Anybody want to challenge that? Anybody anybody at home want to tell us how anybody who's there want to tell us how the witches of Salem were executed?
They were drowned.
Oh, and if they live,
They were put on a dunking stool.
they were a witch.
Yeah. So we usually say
I remember.
we usually say that witches were burned at the stake. Now, you're 100% right in saying that there were witches who were burned at stakes, but
They were dunked in a lake and drowned. They were tied to a dunking stool.
yes, but the bigger issue was that they were witches were burned at the stake primarily in Europe. So this was This was the way that it was usually done in Europe. So what was really important about what you just talked about, though, was what happened during that Salem situation. You just said it. What were they? They were trials. Why were there trials? Because the Torah says there are trials. The Talmud says that they're trials. You can't just make up that somebody's a witch. So now you're going to say, yeah, but they still got executed. They did get executed. They did. I'm not denying they got executed,
Anyone ever get off?
but they got executed because people testified falsely against them in court. Yeah, but the problem is that the people lied, which goes against the 10 Commandments. We just read it.
Right.
You can't falsely testify against somebody. We just read about it in the Torah last week. So that was what was so egregious about the Salem witch trials, is that they got people to falsely testify against their neighbors. And that's why it was so, I mean, that's not the only reason, but it was terrible because people lied in court about people. So this is what the Talmud says. It's what the commentary says, is you cannot execute somebody without evidence. You have to have witnesses who are unimpeachable. And even then, you have to have definitive proof that the person actually did it. Now, I'm not going to get into it too much with what the Talmud discusses, because you saw the Talmud does discuss it. There's pages of it. There is an issue, which is the person has to almost own up to it and say, I did this. And so unless the person's going to do that, there's very likely that the person's not going to be executed. So it did not happen a lot in Jewish tradition where the person was executed because they'd have to literally admit to it.
So they lied in Salem.
Well, yeah, and they lied against people, but Joyce, that's why the crucible and all these other stories were so powerful, was because it was about the mass, it was about how people turned on each other. And that was the phenomenon, not so much just not the fact that people were accused of witches, but the community turned on itself and cannibalized itself, where one person turned on a person and then they turned on, so it just became what? It went on for a few years. I think it went on for 7 or 8 years. I'm not positive. I mean, look it up, but it was kind of, again, a phenomenon of community tearing itself apart rather than specifically about witchcraft. All right. So obviously all of these things are grouped together. And then we're going to finish with this wonderful law of how you treat people, which we've read a lot about, bad behavior. But what are you supposed to do? You shall not wrong or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Your communal leaders shall not ill-treat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, I will heed their outcry as soon as they cry out to me, and my anger shall blaze forth, and I will put you to the sword, and your own wives shall become widows, and your own children orphans. So here, the law about treating other people in your midst is very strict. And you could say, well, why is the Torah so concerned about it? Well, the Torah tells you because you are strangers yourself. And so you have to be very, very careful how you treat people who live amongst you who are not you. And this is way, way, way advanced for the ancient world, was this idea
Yes.
that people who live amongst you. Now, the word that's used here is probably not really well translated as a stranger. Does your translation, Mary, say stranger? It does. That's the King James says stranger. Glory, what does your translation say? So the word alien is actually a little bit better of a translation, other than the fact that when we say alien today, we usually think about someone like ET from another planet, but they are talking about somebody who lives amongst you, who is not you, who's not from your people. But that's different than the understanding that we even have in Hebrew today.
But we used to use that for illegals coming across from the Mexican
Correct,
border.
correct,
Illegal aliens.
correct. So that
And
implies,
we weren't allowed to settle.
okay, so because part of the problem is that because the word alien has this thing of like they're from another planet. But the reality in Hebrew is that the word gerim in Hebrew, a ger is, we oftentimes translate it as a stranger, but it is also could be very easily translated as a resident amongst you,
Oh,
a resident amongst you, which is not someone who is there temporarily with you, but someone who lives amongst you permanently. Now, what's interesting about it in Hebrew today, the word ger isn't even translated as stranger. It doesn't even have the meaning of stranger. You know what a ger is today?
Hmm.
It's the word we use for a convert.
Oh, really?
So we actually use that word today. When we talk about the word for conversion is gerut in Hebrew. A ger is someone who converted to Judaism. We call them a ger, which is, it goes back to the Talmud. Even by the Talmudic period, we were calling a ger someone who was a convert. So it's not a stranger. It's not an alien. It's somebody who lives in your midst, who is taking up living in your community, living in your midst, living by your rules, is obligated to follow your rules, and you're also obligated to take care of them as part of your community. Does everybody understand that? That is different than, I think, even the translation of an alien.
my footnote says all defenseless people.
Well, that seems to be a little bit of, that's a contextual decision. Look, they put a stranger with widows and orphans, right? So they definitely put them together with that. So I'm not saying that that's wrong, but the idea here is that these are people who live amongst you, who you're responsible for. They're responsible to you. There's mutual responsibility here, because if we read in other places that a ger is responsible for certain things. Look, what's interesting is that we called ourselves, the Torah calls ourselves, you were gerim in Egypt, right? So whatever we were in Egypt, we were considered to be gerim in Egypt. So if there's people like that live in your midst, treat them better than the Egyptians treated us. Well, that's not so hard, because as long as you don't make them slaves, we're treating them better than we got treated. But there is this understanding that we learned from our experience. We learned what not to do to people. And we could say the same thing goes for the way we treat people in this country, because we were not always treated well in this country. So we would say we would not do the same thing to them, right? So if we have an organization or a club, we probably shouldn't exclude people from that club, because we were excluded from those clubs when we were in this country.
No, Groucho Marx they started their own club, too.
Yeah, well, he famously said, I don't want to be any part of a club that would have me. That was I wouldn't join any club that would have me as a member, is what he said.
Really?
That's what he said. But he also famously said, supposedly, he had a daughter who was half Jewish. And so supposedly, when there was a question of whether she could go use the pool at LA Country Club, he said, can she go in halfway? Now, I don't know if these are all things that really happened, but that's what he said. But yeah, no, there were real issues. And that's one of the things I talked about in the sermon, was that, yeah, we felt this. So we try not to do it to other people. But when it gets into the issue of how do we treat people who are not residents in this country, there is this understanding too that there is a mutual responsibility. So that just as people who live in our country, we don't treat them poorly, we also expect them to follow our rules, and that they have to follow our rules, and that they're part of society, which means they have to pay taxes, they have to be part of society, they have to be responsible members of our society as well. So the Torah doesn't say these people get a free pass. It just says you don't oppress them and you don't wrong them. It doesn't say here that you're obligated to do other things for them that, again, that we wouldn't even do for ourselves. So I will make that point. The Torah does not say that we don't have to take care of people who are not living here as citizens better than we treat our own people, but it says you're not allowed to wrong them, we're not allowed to oppress them, and we understand that they are not to be ill-treated. We don't take advantage of them. Yeah, we don't take advantage of them. And God says, I'm going to hold you responsible if you do. I mean, it says that. My anger will, you'll wind up being like them. Here it says, if you lend money, we're going to finish with these last couple of laws.
That's interesting that they
yeah,
said it
last-
was exact thing.
I'm going to get to that. Yeah.
But that's what people were so upset with Jews about being.
Okay, so let's read it. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, do not act towards them as a creditor, exact no interest from them. If you take your neighbor's garment and pledge, you must redeem it before the sun sets. It is only available if it is the only available clothing. It is what covers the skin, and what else shall your neighbor sleep? Therefore, if that person cries out to me, I will pay heed, for I am compassionate. So let us discuss this, finish with this today. Or we'll read the next two lines, but if you lend money, do not exact interest from them. Now, how could you do business, right?
To the poor.
Poor, exactly. So it's talking about people who are literally asking for their food for their life. This is not the person you're doing business with. It's not if somebody comes to you and says, I need to borrow money because I'm making an investment. I'm buying some crops from Syria that are coming here. They're going to pass through here. It's a little risky. Crops can get stolen. They can get stolen by raiders, whatever. There's a little risk, but I'm going to pay you. That happened all the time. That was the basis for business. But they are talking about the poor. You do not charge the poor money. Now, here's something that you would say, but does the Torah say you can exact any interest from them? Let's look at the translation. Glory, what does your translation say?
If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not be like a money lender, charging no interest.
Do not be like a money lender. Wow. That's not what it says. But I think they've gone even, like, my image of that is Shylock and yeah. But what does King James say? Yeah. So that's the King James, and that's usury.
Yeah, but
Now-
that's so, that's not what you use for.
Correct. So where does this even come from? Look, Christians had a bigger issue with this than we did.
You mean lending money?
The whole reason why Jews were brought in to be money lenders, folks, was because they took this as a strict law. They couldn't charge interest to their people. So they wouldn't charge interest to their people, not until the Renaissance period. The Italians started doing it, and then the British started doing it, and then the Jews were out of business. But the only reason why they brought Jews in to be money lenders was because they followed this law of the Torah. They said the Torah says you can't. The Catholic Church understood this, used the law of usury, was that you couldn't charge interest to somebody. So it says you shall not do it from your own people, but you can do it to someone else's people. So Jews were allowed to lend money because they were not of their people. So they fulfilled a really important role as money lender, which is exactly why the NIV uses that translation, because everybody knows what they're really talking about, which were Jews who were money lenders for business in Europe throughout the Middle Ages, because Christians couldn't do it to each other, but they could bring in a Jew to lend money to them. And that's what they did. And that's how Jewish money lending as a practice started. It wasn't because Jews were good at money lending. It was because they were Jewish and could do it, because they weren't Christian. Only non-Christians could do this. Eventually, the church figured out that's not what it means. And then the Jews were out of luck. But for a long time, that's how they were able to do their business. So they would lend money. That's what they did. And again, that's how some of these banking houses started, was because they were good at it, and they were better than other people because they had a 200-year head start on it. Well, that's why the Warburgs or the Rothschilds or any of these other, why the Layman's were good at it, is because we had a long history of doing it. But that's because of the Torah. So the Torah actually set us up because Christians felt that this is the way it had to be understood. Jewish people did not have an issue of lending money to other Jews, ever. We just didn't understand the law that way. Just wasn't understood that way. It says, as John pointed out, it says, the Hebrew word says the needy. The word oni is definitely here. The needy, and that's why it's translated as the poor, which is even more, I mean, the word needy implies anybody, could be anybody. I'm needy. I don't have as much as you, so I'm needy. No, the word is poor. It's poor. And if he gives you a garment as pledge, as collateral, no, you can't keep that, because that's what he sleeps in. That's his basic stuff. So you can't do that. So what?
Why give it a piece of a garment to begin with?
Well, they're basically saying, like, the person says to you, I'll give you my cloak as collateral. You can't take it really from them. And you shall not revile God, nor put a curse upon a chieftain among your people. You shall not put off the skimming of the first yield of your vats. You shall give me the male firstborn among your children. You shall do the same with your cattle and your flocks. 7 days the male firstborn shall remain with its mother. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. And then it says, you shall be a holy people to me. You must not eat flesh torn by beasts in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs. What are these last verses that have nothing to do with each other? Mike, is it really that bad?
What?
The score of the game?
Oh, no, you were there.
Okay. Sorry. I need to check. So the answer here is that these last laws are again, we're not done with them. Their laws will continue in chapter 23. But these laws, these series of laws that we get in the Torah, are essentially there to make sure that we stay together as a society. But they actually finish, if you think about it, with the ways of what's your translation for 27? You shall not revile God or put a curse on chieftain. I get. Yes.
Do not blaspheme. Do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one, because however you translate it, and King James says what, Mary? Yeah. And again, the word Elohim can also be judges. But look, the word tekalel means to curse or to revile, to be cursed. So it's saying you don't curse your leaders. And it's about really respecting authority. And the next lines kind of deal with the way that you show that respect, which is the Torah says you have to give the first of your flocks and the first of your animals to God. Now we redeem the children, right? So when you give your child, your firstborn son, in the Pidyon Haben ritual we talked about, you redeem the child back, right? You get the child back. But it follows this idea that you give the firstborn of your flocks, of everything that you have, to God. Again, you can see why sacrifice, and I mentioned this during the Torah service, why it was such a big deal in the ancient world, because everybody did this. They did it to make sure that the rest of their stuff would be good. And so every animal, and you didn't have to do it every time the animal gave birth, but when the animal gave birth, you had to give the first one up to God. It's not every year that the flock had a cattle, but the first calf that the cow ever had was not yours, it was God's. Which is why this whole concept of human sacrifice is kind of preserved in the Torah, if you will, because we don't do it. We don't actually sacrifice. And it finishes with this, the line, and this is why the chapter finishes with this: you shall be holy to, you're supposed to be a holy people. You're supposed to be holy people to God. And then it says, you must not eat flesh torn by beasts. Now, this is a weird way. Look, this doesn't end the laws. This ends the chapter. This doesn't even the parsha. The parsha goes on for another chapter. The parsha doesn't end until the end of chapter 24. As I told you before, here's the really weird thing. This all happens at Mount Sinai. These are all laws given to us at Mount Sinai. We're still in that. We're still in this. We're still in this. still in these laws,
They're all subsection.
which means that it wasn't just the 10 Commandments given to us.
Wow.
Now, it's not necessarily all the laws, but these laws are also given here. And we'll take a look at some more, not next week, because next week is Yom Kippur. Don't look at me like that. I'm not making this up, Doreen. It's Yom Kippur.
Making it up.
It's Yom Kippur next week, Wednesday night. That's right, in the morning. Yeah.
How long did Moses sit there?
Well,
Yeah, but but he could have gotten all these on a day. I mean, that's the thing. The thing that we don't realize is that when we talk about the covenant, this pact of the law, there's at least one version of it that this is still here. And you'll see it next week or the week after, when we look at it. You'll see that these laws are still all going down. One comment about this last part, because I don't want to skip the dogs. Can't skip the dogs. You must not eat flesh torn by beasts. So we were reading before about animals and things get torn apart, whatever. But this is any kind of beast. I mean, this is any kind of animal that gets torn apart, however it happened. The dogs get to eat it. Your dogs get to have the meat. So dogs get something. Got to take care of your dogs. They get all the leftovers. And it's not even just the leftovers. Any animals that you find that were torn by beasts, you can't eat them. It's not kosher. Now here's a law. This is the first law of kashrut that we really have.
Wow.
And I mean that by saying the first thing that the Torah tells us that we can or can't eat. I mean, I guess it says you're supposed to eat matzah and stuff like that. Those are, but this is actually laws of kashrut. So you're not allowed to eat animals that have been torn up, that you find. Roadkill, if you will. You're not allowed to eat it. Now you can say that I don't want to eat it, but there are people who eat it. No, there are people who eat it in this country. Don't look at me like that. That is people that talk about, there's a roadkill cookbook you can buy right now on Amazon. What? Mary? Mary, no, she's been to Missouri. She was in Missouri. But your dogs get to eat them. By the way, folks, just so you know, teach you a little Hebrew word here you already know. I'm just going to tell you, you already know this word. This word in Hebrew for the animals that are torn apart is treif. You said it. You said it.
I taught my dogs kosher and faith.
Yeah, well, your dogs can eat treif. It just says it. Not only that,
They didn't think so, so they didn't eat.
you didn't eat it. That's actually what the word treif means. We use the word treif for anything that's not kosher, right? So I don't eat that. It's treif. That's not actually the literal word for it. The literal word for treifa is stuff that's been torn. It's torn apart animals. So we use the word generically for anything that's, it is, but it comes from Hebrew. The word treifa in Hebrew literally means stuff that's torn. It's torn apart animals. So that's where the word treif comes from. So not like we just say, I can't eat that. It's treif. Like it's a shrimp, right? It's not. It's something that was actually torn apart. We'll get to the shrimp later. But this right now says the only thing you can't eat is animals that are dead, that you found dead. Those that your dogs get to eat it. So dogs are rewarded. And that's what it says, la kelef. It doesn't just say animals, your animals. It actually says your dogs. So dogs do get taken care of. And we said, where does this even come from? We read it in the Torah earlier in Exodus. The dogs didn't make a noise when the angel of death went through Egypt. Right? That's what it says, right? They were silent when the angel of death came. And this is their payoff. God gave them treif. They get to eat treif. They get to eat your roadkill, if you will. Pretty weird, right? So yeah, the dogs get taken care of. There's not a lot about dogs in the Bible. This is one of the few places we saw them. We saw them in the angel of death going around, and now we saw them here. And they get to eat your animals. All right, folks. Happy New Year. And may you be sealed for a good year. Sealed. Now we tell people to be sealed. Right? Not just written, but sealed. Bye, everybody. Take
Good night,
care.
everybody.